Hello, and welcome to the SharePoint Framework and JavaScript Special Interest Group Biweekly Sync. It is January 30th, 2020. I always have to glance to make sure we've gotten the date right. So our agenda for today is latest updates, of course, on SharePoint Framework from engineering, patterns and practices program updates. And then we got three great demos. First from Bob on low-code SharePoint web parts to provision team structure. The next from Luis on using Microsoft Graph to get group member presence details. And then finally from Darrel, a discussion around how the Microsoft Graph JavaScript SDK Fluent API could be shaped, or how that could work. He wants to get some feedback and talk to folks through some of his ideas and hear from folks as well, their ideas. So excited for that conversation as well. And in the interest of time, kind of want to get moving here to get through the three demos. So we got, as always, want to go through our opportunities to participate in the Patterns and Practices program. First and foremost, we definitely encourage everybody that's interested to reach out to us about doing a demo. Those demos can involve anything around SharePoint Framework and anything involving any of our @PnP offerings. And then really more generally, anything client-side development as well generally fits into this call. So you're all doing neat work for your customers or for your companies. Those could be web parts or application customizers, something around provisioning. I would love to have you get on the call and share that with the wider community. To reach out, just reach out to myself or Vesa, and we'll get you started on a demo. Just like to remind folks, we are booked out a little bit on demos, so it might not be like the very next call that we can get you booked, but don't be discouraged. We will get you booked on a call. We'll get you demoing. Love to have those demos. And I know, as I've said before, I always learn something neat from each of the demos, and I hope you all do too. As well, you can always contribute on GitHub. We welcome and encourage contributions across all of our projects on GitHub. And those contributions could take a number of forms. You can report issues. Of course, we don't like issues, but we love to hear when there are issues simply so we can get them fixed and resolved so that everybody has a better experience. You can also submit pull requests. So if you have a little bit of time and you'd like to help out with either fixing an issue perhaps, or adding a new feature, adding some new functionality, this is for any of our libraries. Absolutely encourage you to do so. Submit those pull requests, get that code out there, and love to have those. It really speeds up dev time and makes everything a little bit better for everybody again. And then finally, if you have a little bit of time to help out, sometimes people have questions in those issues lists. They're more how do I kind of questions. You might know the answer to those questions. So certainly encourage you to jump in and help out those folks if you happen to know the answer. It gets them an answer a little bit faster, and just helps folks generally in the community work together and get their work done. And then finally, of course, we always encourage feedback on everything we do. So how are these calls? How are our documentation? Where else can we help? And of course, positive feedback is okay too. If you all really enjoy something we do, let us know. We can try and do more of it or bring that a little bit more to the fore. Of course, if you need help getting started with GitHub or really contributing to these projects, David Warner has started a Sharing is Caring set of guidance and calls. I think the next one I saw is tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken. So certainly encourage you to join that. It's a great place to ask questions, figure out how to use GitHub, how to make contributions, and then get your questions answered in kind of a very direct format there. So I encourage you to check that out. So some links there for you. AKMS SPDev-docs will take you to the all-up SharePoint developer documentation. So that's if you're new to or using SharePoint Framework, as well as add-ins, as well as managed code solutions. All of that can be found there in the SPDev-docs. SPDev-videos will take you to our SharePoint Patterns and Practices YouTube channel that's got videos not just on the recordings of all of our phone calls, but different video series on getting started or using different pieces of the @PnP ecosystem of things. And there's a great new, just a kind of a plug for PnPjs, great new video series coming on using PnPjs v2, working with David Warner on that. He's been doing a great job on those videos. The first one is out, so certainly encourage you to check that out. And we'll have new ones coming very shortly, but there's a ton of great content there across all of the PnP offerings. So if you want to get started on provisioning, you're looking to get into using the React controls, different things like that, do check out the videos. And if you've missed, of course, any of our phone calls, That's how to get caught up and watch the recordings there. SPDev-issues takes you to the SharePoint modern SharePoint issues list. So that's stuff around the modern SharePoint experience and SharePoint framework. That's a place to report any issues, ask questions, and folks will do their best to help you there or potentially redirect you to the correct place if your question doesn't necessarily fit right into SPDev-issues. And then finally, we've got 2 open source organizations that we kind of are help to manage. So github.com/SharePoint, obviously a lot bigger than just the patterns and practices stuff, but some of the patterns and practice stuff is in there, as well as all the official Microsoft SharePoint repositories are there as well. So great samples and examples. And then github.com/PnP for all of your PnP library related needs. So PnPjs, the React controls, the Yeoman Generator are all there, and the CLI, excuse me, are all there in the github.com/PnP. And now, Vesa, ready for updates from engineering.
Cool. Yeah, this is not going to take too long from a SharePoint framework side of the house because the 1.10 came out quite recently. A few updates. There was a Twitter tweet earlier today, just letting everybody know. Office Dev, the classic Office Dev with 20,000 followers have been renamed, and it's now Microsoft 365 Developer or Microsoft 365 and Dev as the account. And as part of that transition, we also actually flipped our Office Dev PnP account as well. Not necessarily related on that, but we wanted to make things in line or aligned for the future things as well. So there was an official announcement that we're moving in a way from Office 365 Dev hashtag usage as well to the Microsoft 365 Dev usage. SPFx usage will be still SPFx because no name changes there. And also maybe a small reminder on that one, please use these tags because I see a lot of tweets and good tweets from the people, but then if you don't use hashtags, we don't actually find them, but at least personally, I follow hashtags. And maybe at one point related on Microsoft 365 patterns and practices, we are looking into extending that side also for non-dev topics. So it's not that our community is only limited on the dev topics, because especially in Microsoft 365, SharePoint, and in all of these environments, it's not just about dev, it's a combination of everything. So there will be admin scripts and PowerShell script galleries and all of that stuff sooner or later. More on that slightly later. Good. So there's a quick question from Russell Grove. Is Office 365 now Microsoft 365? That is the official transition of the naming in Office 365. So you'll see a lot of the official marketing material being transitioned on using Microsoft 365 rather than Office 365. So that's what it means. Now, on the SharePoint framework side of the house, we are backing growth curve. You can actually see the nice drop, which is caused by always the holiday season. So you can actually see the holidays impact always on this. And this time, again, the holiday was quite long from the early, mid-December to mid-January. And we are again back on the growth track on the usage of SharePoint framework. So everything is looking good. People are adapting our patterns, which is great. So it's a safe bet to do Microsoft Teams tabs and all of that stuff using SharePoint framework as well. On this roadmap slide, nothing actually new from here. There's no ETA for the next version yet, so we do not know, and we don't have an update when there will be a 1.10.1 potentially or 1.11. We'll see how that one goes. The next big things will be the app source support, so you will be able to get SharePoint framework-based solutions, even though they would be targeted on Teams or Office settings in the app source, and you're able to take advantage of that. The unified toolchain for Microsoft 365 workloads is coming as well. Probably you can expect more details on that one in build or in SPC, because that's how we always communicate these things as well. But we keep you up to date on the community calls as well. They have the support for Fluid Framework in Works, faster inner loop, dev loop. Hopefully we'll get to that monthly release cycles quite fast, and more extensions queued up as well. But that's it from my side. So quickly update on the situation. Nothing too dramatical since last 2 weeks at least. So let's go to PnPjs side.
All right. So quick
updates.
Right. So PnPjs v2 updates. We did release 2.02, and we actually unpublished 2.01 because of the module difficulties we were having. So apologies for that. But I think that's all resolved now, and we now have 2 sets of packages. So the at PnP/SP package, for example, is going to be composed of ES modules. So you can keep using that for SharePoint Framework and all your client-side dev needs. And then we have a separate set of packages now for CommonJS. And this is really to support Node versions that don't support ES modules or Node apps that can't support ES modules. And all of those are just mirrored packages that are going to be of the form like at PnP/SP-CommonJS. And there's a mirror package for each of the other packages, and they all generally work the same, but it's just packaged a little bit differently. And after doing a ton of research and testing after this issue came up a couple times, the easiest thing to do is to split them into 2 packages, and that way each can have the exact settings and module shapes that they need. And I want to say thanks to everybody who helped test that and helped report those issues around the modules and for your understanding as we got through that. But that should all be resolved now, fingers crossed. Like I mentioned before, the video series is coming out. First video is out, more on the way very soon. Those are great. Really excited to see those coming together. And then 203, as well as the next release for the branch, the V1 branch, planned for February 14th. So we'll have fresh updates out on February 14th. That 202 release really was just to resolve the module stuff, not any real new functionality included in that. So pnp.github.io/PnPjs for your docs, hashtag PnPjs on Twitter. You can always follow me at Mediocre Bowler on Twitter for all your PnPjs updates. Office 365 CLI, new preview version available, 2.6, with new commands for exporting custom Power Platform connectors, retrieving information about Yammer groups, 5 new commands for reporting on SharePoint usage, removing the graph schema, not removing the schema extensions from the CLI, removing the commands to remove the graph schema extensions from a graph entity object. Darrel can correct me later on my wording around that. Filtering command output, and then improved performance, and then some improved externalizing of SPFx dependencies. So great improvements, great to see that preview version out and coming along. You can always install the latest beta from npm install -g at pnp/office365-cli at next. Hashtag Office365 CLI on Twitter. There's a Gitter channel there, as well as, again, that link to the docs. Certainly check out the CLI if you haven't. Great tool to have in your tool belt around cross-platform managing of your resources. Next up, the reusable SPFx controls. This is a set of 2 libraries. The first, React controls, are designed to be used in the body of your web parts or body of your application customizers and to help display content. So these use the Office UI Fabric, or both of these sets of the controls use the Office UI Fabric to give you a great out-of-the-box look and save you a ton of dev time on commonly used controls. Some new stuff. There's a new beta 1.17 out for the React controls. These are the body controls. So automatic localization of labels, some bug fixes, the possibility to hide deprecated and available for tagging equal false terms, and then updated the telemetry package dependency as well for those controls. The 1.16 is the current version of the property controls. These are controls designed to be used in the edit pane of your web part. So again, giving you a great out-of-the-box appearance to your experience, saving you a lot of dev time to get that stuff into your web parts and out to your users. So check both of those out. More information can be found at the links there at the bottom, github.io/sp-dev-fx-property-controls for the property controls, and sp-dev-fx-controls-react for the content controls. And both of those are React-based controls, so definitely want to check those out. So last but not least, the SPFx Generator 1.11 is out. Version 1.11 of the generator is out. This is a SharePoint, or I'm sorry, misspeak. This is a Yeoman Generator built on top of the out-of-the-box SharePoint Framework Generator. So you're going to get, as I've said, a real quote-unquote real SharePoint Framework project with all the same dependencies under the hood from Microsoft, but with the ability to have a lot more control and a lot more options as you set this up for the kind of dependencies you include, the libraries you include, and so forth. Upgrades in this 1.11 version. So you're now can create 110 SharePoint Framework projects, improved Yarn and PnPm support, no relation. Microsoft Graph types have been added in there as an option, and then update dependencies for handlebars and Vue. A preview of the Office UI Fabric 7 is included, as well as a bunch of bug fixes. So a great release. Excited to see progress continue to be made on the generator, and encourage folks to use that to help them get started on their projects, especially if you want to support some of the things not supported right by the out-of-the-box generator. So a great way to kind of, another great tool to keep in your tool belt. So keep that in mind for getting your project started. npm install-g at PnP/generator-SPFx, documentation there, aka.ms PnP generator, and then as well a Gitter channel there, Gitter.im generator/generator, because if you've ever used Yeoman, you need to have the word generator in there at least a few times. And now, with that, I think we've left plenty of time for our 3 demos. Bob, are you there?
Yeah, how are you?
Doing great.
Hi, everybody.
How you doing?
I'm doing real well. Thanks for the opportunity to be on the call today.
Sure.
Good. All right. So, yeah, my name's Bob German. I work with partners a lot here. I'm a partner technical architect at Microsoft, and so I've been working a lot on Teams applications lately, and a lot of the partners I work with don't have a lot of developers, and so they're looking for those low-code kinds of solutions. And I was kind of inspired into this whole direction by at the Teams Airlift, seeing Caruana Gatomo show this feature, which is it's just a link here in the Teams sidebar that opens up the Learning Pathways SharePoint site. So this is just an amazing training capability, and you know, a lot of great work that went into this. But it's a SharePoint site that gets provisioned by the SharePoint provisioning engine, and here's how it works inside of Teams. So what she did here is actually really pretty simple, right? Teams has a manifest just like SharePoint Framework, and you can see here that it's this particular solution has some static tabs in it, right? And then we're just taking those static tabs, we're installing this, going into the Teams administration portal, and I guess maybe I'll take the time to show this or not, but actually coming in here to app policies and pinning that up there for everybody. And I'll go back to that if I have time, but I'm just gonna stay quick. A couple other examples though. It's like, well, why couldn't you use this for any SharePoint page so that everybody who knows how to build SharePoint pages could use this kind of a technique? It works great for SharePoint Framework, which we love, but is not friendly for the low-code developers, right? What if I wanted to do this with Outlook? Well, Outlook integration is coming, but here's a quick and dirty version of it. What if I wanted to use this with a Power App? I'm not a Power Apps person. Can you tell? This is maybe the ugliest Power App ever. But notice that it's working inside of here, and I can just pin this to my UI, or I could actually publish this out using app policies to everybody. So this all works pretty well just as it is, but notice that these are static tabs. Static tabs are only visible in what they call personal view, which is these things that are on your toolbar, on your sidebar, or here in the little pop-up. And if you wanted to put a tab inside of a team or a group chat, right? And here's another example, by the way, just a SharePoint homepage, right? Anything, a list could be useful in this context, right? And sort of make an app out of it. Maybe I want to actually add that to a team. So the problem is that if you want to go into what's called a configurable tab, or if you want to go into a group chat or a team rather than just this one-on-one user kind of personal view, you need to create something called a configurable tab. And that configurable tab requires a configuration page, which requires code. So let me show you an example. If I go here into, well, actually, let me show you the little open source sample. So in order to open this up to low-code developers who maybe aren't going to want to write the configuration code to do this, I created this little sample web part. And you can put this web part on any modern SharePoint page and turn the SharePoint page into a configuration page that works in Teams. So it's really simple. You could go quite a bit fancier than this, but right now it just gives a set of choices of what do I want to show. So here I've got 2 choices, 1 per line. Each tab needs to have a unique ID called an entity ID, and each one has a URL. I also have this little feature here, which is to redirect pages, tabs back through this page, which means whenever anybody clicks on one of those tabs, rather than go directly to this URL, it will go back to this page with the web part on it, which will send it along its way and give me the ability to change the URL later on down the road if I want to. So what I can now do is take this URL here of the configuration page that I've just created, and this time I'm going to, instead of manually editing the Teams manifest, I'm going to use a tool called App Studio, Teams App Studio. And here's a little SharePoint Tabs app. And inside of there, I've just pasted this URL to that configuration page, right? So I've got a couple personal tabs here. These really don't have anything to do with my demo. They actually work here underneath of this personal experience, but I want to show the configuration tabs. So I've got my web part set up on a page. I've got the page URL as my team tab. Now, if I go to test and distribute this, I can install it from here, and I can put this into a team or into a group chat. So let me pick a team, and I'll just go ahead and put this into the Amazing Project team, set up the tab, and what will happen is Teams will open up the configuration page, and as it does it, it's actually going to show my web part here on that little page. So I can pick, let's look at the autonomous vehicles. We'll put that in there as a tab and save that. And this is really only like 5 lines of code inside that does the configuration. Most of the code, and there's not a lot of code, most of the code is just giving the user the choices and stuff, but even that's not very much. Note that I can also come back here now and change the settings on this tab, and I go back to that same configuration experience. No, I really want the research page on here, please. And that changes the page, but not the name of the tab. Is just kind of, that's a different function here, so I can do that manually. So that's really it. I mean, there's not a lot there, except for I feel like this could be extremely powerful for low-code developers. I've written a couple of blog articles on this, on how to get started with all the details of how to set up the learning pathways, and then how to use this new configurable web part to build these kinds of solutions into group chats and teams. So that's it. And maybe I took less than 10 minutes, giving the other demos more time. I knew this would be a simple one.
Great. Thank you very much. Very informative.
Sometimes in this world of SharePoint, you find yourself writing these little pieces of glue code, right? And this is a perfect example. It's just this little piece of glue code that opens up a whole set of scenarios for people who don't want to open up, start coding in SharePoint Framework themselves.
And I have to say, Vesa, here from my side, that that's a great example of the simplicity of surfacing SharePoint-specific capabilities as an application in Teams, because Teams is kind of an application host, and this shows how simple it is actually to surface individual applications and functionalities there. Plus the fact that now after Ignite 2019, we support the private apps, and you can easily make those things happen as well. So really, really cool stuff.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, great.
And on to the next.
Luis, I think you are up.
Thank you. So yeah, the sample that, by the way, is already available in the repo. I'm pretty sure David will text the link in the chat in a minute. Thank you, sir. Yeah, I'm going to show you how we can use the new presence endpoint in the Graph API to get the presence information of the different members of an existing group into SharePoint. So before, well, let's see how it works. So yeah, I have team site, modern team site created on here. So as you can see, there are 5 members. And with the out-of-the-box person information, there's no presence, at least not so far. So I thought it was good to create a web part that uses this API and give us the same members information, but with the presence icon as well. So let's see how it works in the workbench. The web part is running on here. So if we add the presence, we can see here the different members of the site with the presence icon and also the activity of each of them. So if, for instance, I now go to Teams and I change the presence here, let's say busy, and I refresh the page, it's saying busy now. Okay, so before diving into the SPFx code, I'm gonna show you how we can use the endpoints just from Postman, so we can see the kind of the request we need to do and the kind of the response we're gonna grab from the endpoint. So here in Postman, I'm using the Microsoft Graph Postman collections, another open source project with a bunch of requests in Graph, which is really a great resource. So I'm gonna grab a new access token just in case. Use token. This is just the me endpoint. So in order to use the presence, we actually have a couple of endpoints. One of them is just the me presence endpoint. So this is gonna give us, as you can imagine, the presence of the current user. So if we send the request, it's just a get request, and we are getting the ID of the user and also the availability busy and activity busy. While the availability is, busy, away, and this kind of things, and the activity is some extra information like in a call, in a meeting, out of office, and these kind of things. And also there's a second endpoint that is the one that we are using in the code in the web part that is giving us the present information for a list of user IDs. So in this case, we need to do a post request to the communications get presences by user ID. And we need to send a list of the different user IDs. So if we send the request, you're gonna get for each of the users with the user ID, so you can do the match, the availability and activity. And by the way, if you are sending a user ID that is not actually a valid user ID in your directory, you are just getting the presence unknown. So the request is not gonna fail, but you are getting presence unknown in the response. So these are the two different endpoints in the Graph API to get presence information. So let's take a quick look to the code in SPFx. And actually before that, I'm going into the SharePoint Admin Center, because in order to use these endpoints in SPFx using the Graph client, we first need to grant permissions. We need to add the presence read all permissions for the Microsoft Graph API. And I've done this using the great Office 365 CLI. So in the README file, you have the command that you need to run in order to add the permission to the service principal for the scope presence read all. So Once we have the scope added into the permissions, we can call the endpoints using the Graph client, and this is what I'm about to show you. Let me do this smaller. Okay, so basically in the web part, not much code here. Just in the onInit method, I'm using the Graph client factory to get the Graph client and sending that Graph client into the React component, the one that is doing all the hard work, the people with presence component. And in the people with presence component, when the component is mounted in the React lifecycle, I'm calling the getMembers function. This is a custom function in here that is doing the call to the Graph API as well in order to get all the different members of the SharePoint site. So as you can see, we are calling the groups endpoint with the group ID and the members, and that's going to give us the different members of the group, and just doing a mapping into a custom interface and returning that dictionary to the main function. And then I'm just getting the different user IDs, and the next call is the getMembers presence. And if we take a look to this function, this is doing the post to the Graph API endpoint that I just showed you a minute ago in Postman, get presences by user ID with the different user IDs that we got in the first call. And this is what I'm returning, the dictionary of the different people, but in this case, including also the information from presence, availability, and activity. So in the render method, I'm using the Office UI Fabric component, the persona component. So I can specify here the display name of the user. I'm also showing the department and the activity in the tertiary text, extra information with the activity, and the presence property is going to show you the availability from the Graph API. And in this case, we need to do some kind of conversion because currently is not the same information that is coming back in this availability field from Graph and the options that we have in this present field. So basically, I'm here is matching here. So if the availability from Graph is saying busy or busy idle or available idle, I'm using the proper persona presence option to just render the component. So that's pretty much everything, actually. There's not much code on the web part, so just getting the members and calling the API with the list of user IDs, as I showed you in Postman. So any question, just feel free to drop the message on the chat, and that's actually all.
Great stuff. Very cool. Great to see Graph capabilities shown off on the call and how to use that within SharePoint Framework. Speaking of Graph capabilities, we've got Darrel on the call.
So
how's it going?
This is my first join on the call. Am I allowed to turn on video here? Does that work for you guys?
That's fine with us. Sure. You're being recorded, just a heads up.
Oh, yeah, that's okay. It's always good for people to be able to see my facial expressions when I say certain things. So, yes, my name is Darrel Miller. Let me share my screen and tell you a little bit about the role that I play. If you want to reach out to me, I spend a sad amount of time on Twitter, so it's always an easy place for you to be able to find me. So it's Darrel_Miller on Twitter. I do work on the Graph Developer Experience team. I own the SDKs. Is one of the things that I do across all the different languages. And also, I actually sit on API review. So that Get Presence API review is one that I sit on. So if there are things consistently across the Graph API that you think we should fix, things that you think we could do better, let me know, because I get involved in a lot of those kind of API reviews. If you've been following along closely with the PnPjs, you may have seen the PR that came about and was a little bit of a hoo-ha about removing graph components. I'm the bad guy, with kudos to Billie Eilish there, who communicated that whole thing fairly poorly. I'm glad we got that fixed, and it's actually a good thing because it's what triggered this whole presentation here. And I hope moving forward we can have a lot more closer conversations between the PnPjs group and our Graph SDK team. If you go on GitHub, and you'll have to forgive me, I'm a PM here, so I'm running off the rails, not having a PowerPoint presentation in order to keep me on rails here. So if you want to know a little bit more about the overall way that we build Graph SDKs, we have on the Microsoft Graph org, we have the Microsoft Graph SDK design repo. And this is where we collect together publicly the requirements that go into building the SDKs. Because one of the goals that we've had from the beginning is to try and create something consistent across the languages. Now, when I say consistent, I'm not trying to say, well, everybody's going to code in C#, but just in a different language. The idea is that we do things that are native to the language, but have a bunch of common components so that when we're sharing ideas and talking about capabilities, we can talk about things using common language. So this is kind of our architectural diagram for all of the SDKs that we build. And the piece that I really want to talk about today is the area that's called the request builders in here. The green layers are ones that we actually code generate, and the blue layers are ones that are curated artisanal code. And I think this is really where the main difference between the approach with the Graph SDK team and the PnPjs team go. We code generate a whole bunch of stuff, and we do that based on the metadata that comes out of the graph. It comes out as CSDL, which is this ugly XML document that is exposed under the $metadata endpoint of graph. And then we take that CSDL and we feed it through a bunch of machinery, and we generate a set of, well, first of all, we generate a set of models. And in the TypeScript world, or in the JavaScript world, we generate, if you just flip over here for a moment, the TypeScript typings module. So all of the models, if you want TypeScript types for all of the models of Graph, you can pull this in either via an NPM package or via definitely typed. And so we generate all the models, and we're currently doing that for JavaScript. What we currently don't do for JavaScript is generate request builders. And there's a few reasons why we don't do it. One is just we just haven't had resources to do it. There was some initial feedback that we don't need to do it. And over time, we've had more and more feedback that, yes, we really should do it. Now, the thing is, this is something that PnPjs has built into with the graph library within PnPjs. But it's not auto-generated. And the challenge with Graph, of course, is it keeps growing and getting bigger and bigger and bigger all the time. So it is a mammoth effort in order to try and stay up to date. And the other thing, of course, is we don't have just the V1. We also have the beta API. And if you want to try all new stuff that's coming out regularly, then you want the beta. So to try and provide a library and hand code the entire surface area with a Fluent API would be a significant amount of effort, and I wish that on nobody, especially not community folk who are actually doing this in their spare time. So we want to build Fluent API. There already is one in PnP in PnPjs. How do we make sure that we do something that benefits everybody in the most effective way? So what I've done is over in our JavaScript library, I've created a wiki where I've started to collect together some examples of how it's done in PnPjs and sort of how we do it in our Fluent builder at the moment for C#, and you're going to have to squint a little bit to see how that might look in our JavaScript library. And let's go through a few of the areas that are of interest, and then kind of draw some conclusions. And I would love to get feedback. So let's take, if we go into the PnP docs, and I'm just jealous that you have so many docs. I have a whole bunch of docs that I still need to push for our SDKs, but let's not get sidetracked. So in order to retrieve the set of contacts related to a particular user, we have a graph kind of root object, and then using dotting, we can go and access other collections that exist. If you want to get to a particular user, you use get by ID, and then you go off and retrieve the contacts, which in CSDL language is referred to as a navigation property of the user. Now, if we go and look at our docs, and the one thing that we do have that I do really, really like is if you go and look in our reference documentation, and you go through the examples that are here, you will find a number of the examples, and it depends on whether the team documented it, put the appropriate annotation on the doc. But if they did put the appropriate annotation, we go off and we take this HTTP and we generate some samples. So in this case, this generated, okay, we have a root object, and in this case it's hitting .me, but you can hit .users just the same. And then we go to contacts, and the only difference here really is we insert this call to .request here, and it's an explicit action that says, okay, I finished finding the entity that I'm looking for, and now I want to make a call. And we end up, there are places where you can do additional stuff, which we'll show in a minute here. So as you can see, we're not too far off on that first example. Like, we're doing fairly a similar kind of thing. Oh, that was in C#, though. The way it currently works in JavaScript is you grab the client, and then we have this API method. And you're expected to construct the URL yourself, which sometimes it's good, sometimes it's a real pain in the butt. So if we added the Fluent interface, absolutely we would keep the same mechanism of doing it. In fact, we've had requests that we add this kind of make a custom request just using a path back into the C# language. So that's probably something we're going to add into the C# language. And actually, if you flip over to Java, you'll see it basically looks the same. There's a few extra parentheses in Java, graphclient.me.contacts. And now we say build request. It's just a style difference. So going back to our Fluent investigation, okay, let's take a look at something where we're actually creating an entity in a collection. So so I don't end up with way too many windows. Let's take a look at creating an invitation. So here we go. We start with the root object. We go to a collection. We call a create method on it, and we pass in a set of parameters to that invitations collection. Same thing looking over in the Graph SDK world. So here in C#, we new up an object. We take the root object, we go to the invitations collection, we stick on this extra request, and we do add async and pass the object in. Really, really very similar. JavaScript is slightly different in just that we create the object and then we do post. So we're sticking in most cases with the HTTP method. There's some exceptions to that, but that's again pretty much a style issue. Looking at going and getting an individual item. Now, the example I picked from the PnPjs example here is simply going and retrieving a team. So we say teams, get by ID, and go and retrieve an individual team entity back. If we look, interestingly, the teams docs have that magic attribute that stop us from actually creating the doc. So I'm going to go look at going and getting a group. It's basically the same thing. And here it's a case of we take the root object. Instead of saying .get by ID, we're taking advantage of C# has the ability to do operator overloading, and we just use the index operator in order to request it. But it looks very similar. Again, at the moment in JavaScript, you have to construct the ID. Okay, those are a few more simple examples. Now let's get to some things that get a little bit more complicated, and some of the things that kind of force the way that you do Fluent. And I was really quite happy when I looked at this yesterday, because we are a lot closer than I thought we were. So if we take a look at the way PnP does batching, PnP goes on and says, go create me a batch. Now I have a batch object. Then it says, we do basically a Fluent call, and then we say, put it into this batch. And then we make another call, and we say, put it into this batch. And so on and so forth. We make a set of requests, and then we end up with a batch, and we say, execute on it. Now, I'd love to point you to the documentation and where we show you how to do this in the Graph SDK, but it's not pushed up yet, so I'm going to have to pull you over to my VS Code here. And here is the example that does approximately the same thing in .NET. You take the root object, you make a request. Here I'm going off and getting a user, and you say me.request. And the idea is that .request just constructs a request object that you can then hold on to. So here we go and get the list of events. We create a request object. You hold on to it. Now we create a request content object, which is equivalent to the PnPjs batch, and we add it in. And you can provide parameters to this add batch request step in order to specify the order in the same way it was done in the PnPjs. And then the execute, instead of actually executing on the content itself, we simply just take the batch endpoint and we do post with that batch content. So really not a long way apart. Let me go back to here, and the last set of examples I want to show is I did struggle a little bit to find some good examples that showed using the OData querying capabilities on top of the Fluent API, but I did find this example, which was pretty good. So here we go, sp.web, and then we go and say .files. We do get folder by server relative URL, and we do .files, and then we use the projection capability .select and the .top capability. All right, so this just applies on top of these objects because I believe it works because they derive from the OData queryable base class. Flying back to the way this works in there we go, over here. If we go look at this particular example, where we're going and getting a set of users, we go and we build the request object, and then the request object comes back and it has the abilities for doing these things like select. If you actually go into the use the SDK, there's a bunch of other examples in here of how you do use the select, how you do filtering and order by, and the very expanding and using top and all of these kind of things. Largely, it's the same concept, okay? So hopefully what I've demonstrated here is what the PnPjs graph library has built is really not that far away from what our Fluent library in C# is already building, and something that we could build in the JavaScript TypeScript world also. At this point, what my ideal outcome would be is we align on the Fluent style, and I think the PnPjs team has experience with people using the particular style that you're using, and I think when I didn't create a link to it, but somewhere in this docs there is a description of the OData queryable. I'm not going to be able to find it at the moment, but anyway. There's a set of parameters with regards to setting query headers, with regards to setting just HTTP headers. We could follow that set of conventions and use our generation mechanism to generate a set of what we call request builders. And ideally, we could layer those request builders on top of our existing JavaScript core, or hopefully on top of the PnPjs core. So it would be an opt-in module that PnPjs could pull in and layer a Fluent API on top of that core. And so we would create the base stuff for either the V1 or the beta. And then from a community perspective, it's like if there are other more richer expressions or things that we just can't do from a code gen perspective for some reason, that those could be the only things that would have to be manually handcrafted and coding. I have gone through the thought exercise of, well, we could maybe just adopt the PnPjs core because it's serving largely the same process. The challenge we have is one of the major efforts that's going on at the moment within the whole Graph SDK work is aligning with the Azure SDKs. And I don't know where that's going to take us and whether that's going to end up generating some difficulties with now we've got to align 3 different orgs within the company. So that's my proposal so far. And I would like to explore further this idea of being able to generate that set of Fluent APIs that would work for both our JavaScript core that is currently used by SPFx and the PnPjs core, using the Fluent style that you've already created as our starting point for work. And with that, I didn't leave a whole lot of time, but feedback would be thoroughly appreciated.
Yeah, Darrel, it's really exciting to see the innovation you guys are driving on the Graph team and this SDK architecture, and with the generated libraries. I think, if you guys can nail that, that's huge for the community. So, a couple of questions from the chat here. The first one is, when will version 2 of Graph be officially released?
Wow, there's a side conversation. I'm not really well. The official answer is nobody knows, and it might not make a difference. We believe that, and we are working with the teams at the moment in order to provide a way that teams can make breaking changes to the graph that actually aren't breaking changes. It follows a methodology that allows new things to be introduced and then things to be deprecated over time. It's kind of a little similar to the GraphQL versioning model. And we think that might allow us, teams, to be able to go and fix things without having to do a big bang V2. Because at the moment, in order to coordinate the 50 different service teams to align on a release date for when they can shift all of their stuff to V2 has proved very challenging to get to. Stay tuned. There's going to be a lot more discussion around that coming soon. But I can tell you that there is currently no planned date for it because nobody quite knows how to get there.
Cool. And then one final question: how can getting asked? How can folks get involved and help out with your work?
We are a GitHub repo. We accept. I hate to say that we accept pull requests. It's just I should use the phrase "sharing is caring," right? We have accepted community contributions. We are going through some changes within our team at the moment. So we are a little behind in providing the necessary feedback to community involvement at the moment. We have not explicitly done a lot of outreach with regards to community involvement because we have sort of spent the last 12 months or so really getting this kind of common architecture together and to get our requirements that we feel are necessary out there in the public. And we are getting into a place where we've built up all of our infrastructure for releasing and management and triaging of issues to a state where we are in a better position to start accepting community contributions. We just haven't been so good at it so far.
One thing worth mentioning maybe is the Microsoft Graph SDK.NET contribution repository. This is a place where people doing .NET development can contribute and add stuff to the community, like testing, unit testing tooling, like handlers for errors and so on and so forth. And with a segue, I'll let you talk more about that, Darrel.
Yeah, so the good thing, Paul Schaeflin started this, and the advantage of this is you can go and add new features without kind of, if we decide that, yes, that's something that would be really great in core, that you can keep using your capability if we happen to slightly redesign it when it gets integrated into core. So this is a side-by-side effort, and we do attempt to say, like, this is a proving testing ground for new capabilities that community members believe should be there, and we can take this and then integrate it into core without it becoming a breaking change for consumers, because you can continue using the one in Contrib, or you can use the one that gets migrated over into core if it goes there. If it's something that we feel doesn't quite fit in core, then it can just stay in Contrib moving forward. This currently only exists in C# at the moment.
Great. And with that, I think we've got to pause, but I just want to say thank you, Darrel, for joining the call. You'll be back, I think, in a couple of weeks to present on another graph topic. I think that's going to be more demo focused, I think.
I'll demo the JavaScript SDK in more detail.
Fantastic. Excited to see that. I think that's February 13th off the top of my head. And so excited to have you back. Thank you, Luis, for your demos. Let me actually get back to the slides so we can close out. And then, of course, Darrel on Twitter, you can always catch up with him if you have further questions or feedback. He definitely is looking to hear from folks who are using SPFx and client-side development on shaping what these JavaScript libraries might become. So definitely a great opportunity to get involved there. Next, SharePoint Framework JavaScript meeting, February 13th. I'm sorry I didn't say thank you to Bob as well for demoing. So Luis, Bob, and Darrel, thank you to all three of you for the great demos today and great discussion. Next, SharePoint Framework JavaScript meeting, February 13th, 2020. So we'll see all of you hopefully back then. And our next general SharePoint Dev SIG will be next Thursday, February 6th. So talk to you all soon. Have a great weekend.